What's up guys, my name is Ignas, welcome back to the channel. In June I've added $400 new into the dividend portfolio on Revolut, and with that started a new position in a consumer discretionary named drhorton, ticker symbol DHI. So for $400 I got 3.43 of a share at $116.58 per share. It was decent timing, the stock is now up 10.36%, so the position is valued at $441.45. So the position was started, as I've picked the largest name from the home builders industry, but now I would like to check if there would be another name with better fundamentals. So today we are doing a dividend stock comparison on 3 names from the residential construction industry. The companies are drhorton, ticker symbol DHI, Lennar, LEN, and Pultegroup, ticker PHM. The dividend comparison will be done with 8 metrics. Positive quarters of revenue, price to earnings ratio, number of shares outstanding, dividend yield, dividend payout ratio, years of consecutive dividend increases, 5-year compound dividend growth rate, and the current dividend yield compared to its 5-year average. So the best stock in each metric will get 3 points, second best 2 and third one will get 1 point. Then after the 8 metrics will sum the results up, and in the end the stock with the most points will be considered the winner of this dividend comparison. I hope that the rules are clear and a little thumbs up is greatly appreciated, and with that out of the way, let's begin. So the first metric we are taking a look into is revenue, and here we have drhorton's revenue over the last 5 years. In 2020 the company was bringing $18.47 billion on the trailing 12 months, and then the largest quarterly jump was by the end of the year, $22.2 billion plus 47.55%. Afterwards they saw steady growth year by year, though there was one negative quarter in 2023 at $7.97 billion, minus 0.33%, and then recently we had 3 negatives in a row, with the most recent one dropping minus 15% on the quarter at $7.7 billion. Though still that is a huge increase in 5 years, and currently the company is bringing in $35.3 billion on the trailing 12 months. This means that Horton had 4 negative quarters, or in turn 17 positive ones over the last 5 years. Now let's take a look into Lennar. In 2020 they were bringing $22.6 billion in revenue on the trailing 12 months, and that was a 4.96% decrease for the quarter year over year. Over the next 2 years there were increases, largest one in the middle of 2022, plus 30% for the quarter to $8.36 billion, and $29.94 billion on the trailing 12 months. So those 2 years had huge increases, but 2023 again saw negativity, minus 3.76% on the quarter year over year, and then the most recent quarter is again negative, minus 4.43%, overall coming in at $35.37 billion on the trailing 12 months. So here we see 6 negative revenue growth quarters over the last 5 years. And lastly, Pultegroup. So in 2020 they were bringing $10.5 billion on the trailing 12 months, and continued on this growth path for more than 3 years. The first negative quarter is in 2023, minus 15.46% on the quarter, and $16.06 billion on the trailing 12 months. And now the most recent quarter in is again a slight decrease, minus 1.42%, still right there at the highest on revenue, with $17.89 billion on the trailing 12 months. So just 2 negative quarters over the last 5 years. Now the next metric we are taking a look into is the price to earnings ratio. Here we have the 5-year history for drhorton. So in 2020 the stock was trading at a P/E ratio of 6.37. Then in 2 quarters with the stock price moving higher, P/E ratio went up over 10 to 11.26. Though afterwards we saw earnings per share climbing for the next 2 years. So the P/E ratio went lower, bottoming in 2022 at 3.97. Unfortunately afterwards earnings per share are gradually moving lower, or at least sideways. In 2024 we had the stock price surging to $189.15, so the P/E ratio peaked at 13.19, but recently the ratio normalized a bit, going to under 10, currently at 9.75. So there were plenty of times in the last 5 years where you could buy the stock with a P/E ratio of under 10, and a few quarters with even close to 5. So currently a bit on the fence with this one. Now Lennar. In 2020 the P ratio was 8.26. Similarly to Horton, earnings per share went up. And in 2022 we saw the P ratio bottoming at 4.77. But for the next 2 years earnings per share went sideways. So in 2024 we then saw the P ratio topping at 11.7. And now recently with the stock price dropping a bit, we currently have the P ratio at 9.17. So quite a similar story to the previous one, where the P ratio at around 10 is not the greatest, as we had times where we were able to get it at closer to 5. And lastly, Pultegroup, 2020 P ratio was 5.55, and interestingly here we see more gradual increase in earnings per share. So in the second part of 2020 the P ratio shot up to 9.21, and in the next 2 years it gradually went down, where in 2022 we saw it at 3.73, but afterwards we didn't see that high of a spike, as earnings per share still climbed continuously. The overall top was in 2024, with a P ratio of 10.56, and then as the share price went a bit lower recently, the P ratio also dropped to currently 7.4. So this is more to the lower side to what we have seen over the last 5 years. Now for the next part we're taking a look into the number of shares outstanding. So we start with Horton. In 2020 the number was at 370 million shares, and they continuously brought it lower in 5 years. Some larger decreases were in 2022, minus 3.61% for the quarter year over year, to 347 million shares, and the most recent one was the largest decrease in 5 years, minus 5.71% to 314 million shares. So in 5 years, Horton decreased the number of shares out by 56 million, which is in turn a minus of 15.1%. Now let's take Lennar. In 2020, they had the number at 308 million shares. Over the last 5 years, they saw one quarterly increase, plus 0.32%, to 309 million shares, but afterwards there was a substantial decrease, even over minus 6% for the quarter, in 2022 to 288 million shares, and then still continual decrease over the next 2 years, with the most recent quarter coming in at 260 million. So in 5 years the company decreased the number of shares out by 48 million, which is then a decrease of 15.58%. And lastly, Pultegroup. In 2020 the number of shares out was 271 million. They kept on lowering it for the next 2 years, and then huge ones in 2022, with up to minus 10.42% for the quarter, to 232 million shares. The rate of decreases went down a bit, but still close to minus 5% on each quarter, and with the most recent one in, we have the number at 204 million shares. So in 5 years the company decreased the number of shares out by 67 million, which is a very nice decrease of 24.72%. Now the next metric will be the dividend yield, and here we have Horton. So in 2020 the yield was 1.01%. It went lower for the next 3 quarters, and in 2021 bottomed at 0.74%. Then with the stock price moving lower, 2022 saw the yield topping at 1.24%. Now for the next 2 years we saw the stock price moving higher, with the yield in turn going lower. 2024 was then a bottom of 0.67%, but recently with the stock price now moving lower, we currently have the dividend yield at 1.16%. So quite up there, close to the tops of what we saw in the last 5 years. Now Lennar. In 2020 the dividend yield was 0.65%, continuously went higher for the next 2 years, because of the sideways action of the stock price and the increases in the dividend payouts. In 2022 the dividend yield topped at 1.95%, afterwards dropped a bit lower closer to 1%, but now with the most recent quarter in, it is again higher, currently at 1.77%. And lastly, Pultegroup. Looks like a different story from the previous 2. So in 2020 the dividend yield was 1.06%. It went sideways and then climbed a bit higher in 2022, topping at 1.52%, but then as the stock price surged higher, the yield dropped, and in 2024 bottomed at 0.57%. Now recently, as we see the stock price moving lower, the yield is coming back up a bit, but still under a percent, currently at 0.87. So still closer to those lows of what we have seen in the last 5 years. Now for the next metric we have the dividend payout ratio. So what part of company's earnings is assigned to pay dividends? For DR Horton, currently the dividend payout ratio is 12.96%, switching to Lennar, and their dividend payout ratio is higher at 19.69%, and now Pulte, with the lowest payout ratio of 7.31%. Metric number 7 is the number of years with consecutive dividend increases. So for DR Horton, they have increased dividends consistently for the last 10 years, now Lennar, and they only increased dividends 1 year, and Pulte, with 7 years of consecutive dividend increases. Next metric is the compound annual dividend growth rate. So here we'll take the 5-year average including the next year's estimate. For DR Horton, the 5-year dividend growth rate is put at 14.17%. Now taking Lennar, their compound dividend growth rate is 14.87%, and Pultegroup, with a 5-year dividend growth rate of 9.07%. Now the last metric is the dividend yield compared to its 5-year average, and for that we're using my dividend investing watch list on Google Sheets. So we are in the tab for DR Horton. We have the stock's dividend yield history of the last 5 years, and on average the stock was trading at a dividend yield of 0.94%. So it seems that the best time to get into the stock was in 2022, with a dividend yield of 1.24%, higher than the 5-year average plus 31.44%. And the worst time was in this slump in 2024, with yield of 0.67%, below the 5-year average minus 29.03%. So getting into the stock right now at a yield of 1.24%, that is pretty much the best time you can go in, higher over the 5-year average plus around 30%. Now switching to Lennar, we have its dividend yield history over the last 5 years, and on average the stock was trading at a dividend yield of 1.27%. So the best time to get into the stock was in 2022 at 1.95%, higher than average for 53.03%, and the worst part was somewhere in 2020 with a yield of 0.65%, below average minus 48.99%. So getting into the stock right now at a yield of 1.81%, that is quite there over the 5-year average plus 42.04%. And lastly we have Pultegroup. Again we have its dividend yield history over the last 5 years, and on average the stock was trading at a yield of 0.98%. So the best time to get into the stock was back in 2022 with a yield of 1.52%, higher than average plus 55.48%, and the worst one was quite recently in 2024 with 0.57%, below average minus 41.70%. Though if we are getting into the stock right now at a yield of 0.8%, that is still below average for minus 18.17%. So we have checked 8 metrics of these 3 names. I have added the results into the table, and we can now start assigning points. So for the first metric, 3 points goes to Pultegroup, with 19 positive revenue quarters over the last 5 years. Second metric again Pultegroup, with the lowest price to earnings ratio of 3.4. Shares outstanding once more to Pultegroup, where in 5 years they have decreased the number of shares out by 24.72%. The dividend yield metric goes to Lennar, where their dividend yield is currently 1.77%. Dividend payout ratio Pultegroup with the number of 7.31%. Years of dividend increases goes to DR Horton, where the company have increased dividends consistently for the last 10 years. 5-year compound annual dividend growth rate goes to Lennar, with growth of 14.87%. And lastly, the dividend yield compared to its 5-year average. Again Lennar, where its current dividend yield is 40% higher than its 5-year dividend yield average. So the points have been assigned and the results are in. DR Horton got 15 points, Lennar 16 and Pultegroup 17. Meaning that with 17 points, Pultegroup is considered the winner of this dividend comparison. The comparison is finished. Unfortunately, this is not the stock that I've picked for my portfolio. Now I will need to consider if I will be sticking to it or if I will be actually changing it for that different name. What do you think, which residential construction stock would be the best bet? Share your preferred ticker symbol in a comment below. Also, don't forget to support the channel and leave a thumbs up under the video. Previously I've made a monthly update on this dividend portfolio, so if you are interested in that, then click on a video that is currently on the screen. And that was it from my side. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.